Welcome to Dark Loops Productions and the What If Crew, a podcast for discussing the Marvel series What If. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist from Illinois State University. And tonight we're having an after party with the What If Crew and all the guests on the show who were able to make it. So glad you're here. Fellow members of the What If Crew, please introduce yourselves and say a little something about who you are, and we will start with Daniel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel, aka the Pop Mythologist. I'm a pop culture blogger. You can find me at popmythology.com.
Excellent. And how about you, Eric?
Dr. Eric Wesselmann, social psychologist, Illinois State University, lover of all things nerdy.
Fantastic. And so now for the people who were guests in earlier episodes who showed up for the after party, we're going to start with Marty. A little something about who you are.
I'm Marty Lloyd. I'm a forensic psychologist practicing in Minnesota, also an very part-time adjunct professor at Gustavus Adolphus College. And it's been a pleasure to be part of this.
Oh, we're thrilled, man. Absolutely. How about you, Travis?
I'm Travis Adams. I'm a social worker with the San Diego VA Vet Center. I specialize in working with veterans with PTSD, and I love all things Marvel and DC.
As we can tell by your office. That's awesome. How about you, Brittani?
I am Brittani Oliver Sillas Navvaro. I'm a marriage and family therapist associate, and I am a doctoral student, so almost done. And I specialize with grief and loss and transitional age youth.
Fantastic. And how about you, Billy?
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's the King of Kings, the Prince of Princes, Dr. Billy San Juan here, coming out of you. I am coming out of you from San Diego. It's very awkward, very xenomorph.
That's the Mucilex talking, man.
That is coming out of you like a Metamucil.
There's the image that will not leave any of us for the rest of the panel.
We'll be discussing trauma later. I am a therapist.
We're talking about it now.
On tour.
All right, then. So here's what we're going to do tonight. I've asked each of you to come up with your top three. We're going to go through everyone's top three. I'll mark down the top three that you gave me, and then each of you is going to be asked to explain your number one. So I'd like everyone to have their number one, have your number one already figured out. Please, no changing your number one because you're persuaded by a friend that it was actually the better episode. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the What If Crew, put them on the block first, and we'll start with Daniel.
Right. So episode number one, or rather the top episode for me was Captain Carter. Second best for me was Star-Lord. And third best for me was part 2 of the Ultron double episode.
Fantastic. So go ahead and explain your number one.
Just because I felt like it was, I don't know if this is the right word, but the most purest what if, or felt the most traditional what if, in terms of what I was kind of hoping for and expecting and was kind of used to based on the comics and stuff like that. But not just that. I just felt like it was just a really beautiful, lovely story where I got to see a couple of really cool characters that I like portrayed a different way. And the setup was really straightforward. There's no, convolutedness or if anything about it. It's really straightforward, but just really lovely and beautiful. And of course, just kind of being able to see Steve and Peggy's romance kind of framed a different way was just lovely.
I just felt like in the Captain Carter one, just having that tiny little switch of just, Steve versus Peggy, cool, but I feel like it took away from Peggy's story because they still threw Steve in there. They still kind of like added like, you still need a man. Here's the Hydra Stomper now. Whereas all the other ones, they were completely different. They shifted so much. So that one had the least difference. And I felt like it did a disservice to her, unfortunately.
And adding to that, like my thought is this placating to the needs of society at this point? And so is this something that we're doing just to shift the narrative of let's put a woman in power, let's like allow her to have a little more voice and more heroic opportunities? And so I'm curious if it was a forced decision or if it was something that was authentic, because you don't have any other really narratives in which, I mean, you have some, but like narratives in which the woman is the lead.
and she's the lead in a completely positive way. There is absolutely nothing negative about Captain Carter. So I loved it for the same reason Daniel did. It's just a sweet love story, right? It continues the MCU of Steve loving her loving him. And it, for, as Daniel said, for me, it was the most true to the what if one small decision had been different. You know, she stayed in the room and that changed things. At the same time, I didn't push it up to the number one because it just, for me, didn't have that edge that some of the others had, that the heroes weren't as good, which is, you know, the kind of story that I'm often like, oh yeah, I want to talk about that one. So yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting points of, was this too perfect? But what I kind of like about it, and I'm just going to throw this out here first of all, I don't know if I can riff on anything Daniel said because the volume from my computer cut out for some reason when he was talking. But based on the other comments, the way I would look at it though is that it's the one that tells the most similar narrative to the original story. It's not that things are better so much in that one, it's that they're more or less the same. And that's I found that interesting. So I kind of like that. It's like, okay, in the end, you know, they're both really heroic characters. Whichever one of them ends up getting the serum, it doesn't make a huge difference. And I'm also going to give this episode credit that I think it does the best job of telling a complete story, because it goes beat for beat for Captain America, the First Avenger, compressing it to a half an hour without feeling rushed or like you're losing anything. And I don't know that any other episode really does that. So just degree of difficulty, I think I have to give this one some credit for. It's not my number one, but it's up there.
Well, and if I may riff off that, you know, I hadn't quite thought about the sort of, it's not better, it's not worse, it's the same ending point, just different, right? Whereas several of the other episodes, as Stanford has pointed out in previous ones, they all go poorly, you know, sort of reinforcing the mainstream universe, with the exception of Star-Lord. Star-Lord, I think, is one of the only ones that actually ends better than the MCU normally does. And it I guess if we run that simulation, that probably makes sense to make it the first episode, right? I mean, unless you've grown up reading Choose Your Own Adventures or reading the What Ifs or the Elseworlds in DC, it is kind of a different cognitive exercise to try to think about how these things could be so different. And so having this be the sort of first foray into it might have been the best option for mainstream audiences.
Definitely the easiest. I'm sorry, Billy, go ahead.
I'm in agreement with that. I think the level of chaos that the different choice made was tight enough to contain a familiar narrative so that audiences could get a taste of what if is about without completely losing them.
I'm in for that. I would agree with that, you know, because it is the least challenging of all the plot jumps. So was there anyone else who picked that one as number one?
So I'm tied.
Okay, so why don't we go to you then? So that means I'm gonna, okay, so what's it tied with?
So it's tied with T'Challa as Star-Lord. Those are my top two.
Got you. So why don't you go ahead and tell us why you liked Star-Lord?
I mean,
go ahead. No. Finish. Give me your 2 and your 3. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my I guess then that would make my number 2 the Doctor Strange losing his heart, so his sort of fall from grace, so to speak. And then my third one would be part 1 of the Ultron.
Ultron 1. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Excellent. All right, go ahead and tell us why you liked T'Challa became a Star-Lord.
I mean, obviously, and we talked about this when we did the second episode. First and foremost, it was a wonderful treat to be able to hear Mr. Boseman's voice again, to hear him act. And in addition to that, I gotta admit, I really liked not just sort of the upbeat nature of it, right? Being one of the only ones that said, here's how things could have gone even better. but also the humor. And you know, there's humor in a lot of the different episodes, but it was just beat for beat so amusing. And it to me, as watching it, it didn't feel forced. Like, I mean, that immediate interaction between T'Challa and the first of the Star Police who shows up, who knows who he is, right? And then, you know, then there's this like, oh no, you can punch me, no, you can't do that. Like, it was just so much fun because it was sort of silly, but I totally bought it as an audience member.
Yeah. Anyone else on that episode?
I'll jump in first because, just fair warning, my list is virtually identical to Eric's, except I have my tie in a different place.
Okay.
But that was also my number one episode, and the reasoning is pretty much the same, and not so much. I'll go a little bit different, not so much about the fun of the episode, but the episode is so purely joyous. It is, you just, you know, not only just everything working better, you see T'Challa as Star-Lord, you know, convincing Thanos that, you know, look, you can just move away from this in a way that's super
You don't have to go there,
effective.
man.
It's just, but everything just working out so much better, and it's just such a wonderful tribute to to Chadwick Boseman in the end, because it's and again, I'm repeating myself because that was the episode of the podcast I guested on previously, but you know, Jimon Hansu in that is just, every line is pure gold that he delivers, but everything about it is so wonderful. And I think the thing that really works the best about it is that it mirrors everything that the what if storytelling process can be. It's, you see T'Challa succeeding in a way more so than he probably does in the MCU, because he's free to play and he's not burdened by all these things, in the same way that the what if storytellers are much more free to play. And I think that was just a really wonderful second episode of the series, you know, to see early on that's okay, here's the freedom you have. And it's a crazy idea. Why would you ever think of that, of T'Challa as Star-Lord? And it just works so well.
Yes, but and this is completely superficial, has nothing to do with plot, has barely anything to do with character. And here's my riff on your guys' opinion, which I respect. I respect your guys' opinion. Here's why it's wrong.
But
was anyone else completely thrown off by the blonde hair?
Who's blonde hair? I can't remember.
It was Nebula's blonde
Nebula.
hair.
Nebula. Okay.
For some reason, I can't fathom alien beings having blonde hair. And it was just a complete discrepancy for me. I will take your silence as a solid agreement.
I have
Thank
no
you very
recovery. I have no recovery.
The answer is no.
It's just,
Because
it's too powerful a point. None of us have any comeback from that. We're just floored.
There is no comeback, because it is a valid point, perhaps the most valid point that will be made in this podcast, the history of this podcast, or any other podcast in the history of podcasts.
I've written down the time. It's a moment in history right now.
It is.
So I'm going to admit that this was my number one episode as well. And, you know, all the things that Eric and Marty said about the joy, I also add, and again, we talked about this a lot during the podcast, this idea of seeing T'Challa in a different light, right? And seeing these attributes of him that get to express themselves in a different space, no pun intended, but it's exactly what it was. And what that really does is it allows you to experience the Black Panther movie differently, right? Because you see that the Killmonger T'Challa dynamic is extremely rich, extremely nuanced. And in the end, it's T'Challa, the one that really goes through the burden of doing the most learning. And on the one hand, we can try to break that down to his character. And the other hand, when we put that character in a new space and we see all this wonderfully joyous stuff, we can see that the tension of the gig, his belief in his father, his belief in his culture is so thoroughly embedded, he can't choose not to experience those issues he went through in Black Panther. So for me, it was all those things. And for me, it was very psychologically rich. And I thought one of the shows that tied into the MCU so far in a really, really cool way. Anybody else have that as number one? No. Okay. And Marty, you told us what your number one was. Why don't you tell us the rest of your scores?
Sure. Again, my list mirrors Eric quite a bit, except my tie is in the number 2 slot. But and I got to give my shout out. Eric's not the only one that can wear a Marvel shirt, but shout out to Doctor Strange. So
there you go.
But yeah, the Doctor Strange episode and Captain Carter were tied for my number 2. And then since I can add that bonus episode on, I would also go with the first part of the finale. So the penultimate episode.
What if Ultron won? Okay, so since I do want to give you time to talk about an episode, why don't you talk about Captain Carter or Doctor Strange, since those were tied for your number 2?
Sure. I mean, we've already discussed Captain Carter quite a bit, so I'll just kind of talk a little bit about the Doctor Strange episode that there's something I think it's the most heartbreaking of the episodes for me in a lot of ways. Just the pain that this guy is going through that seems to be inevitable, except oddly, and maybe my one issue with it, kind of like, well, there is a way around this. And apparently the way around it is if he just damages his hands instead. But it hits such, again, it's profoundly sad, in a way that I like. The Groundhog Day aspect of it as well is a great way to sort of integrate that storytelling. There's a lot of tragedy and also, but I think in the end, I love the idea too. The only one who has any shot at defeating Doctor Strange in the end is Doctor Strange, which I think in a way also sets up the potential redemptive arc that we see later in the season. Because, well, first of all, I believe good Doctor Strange is absorbed by bad Doctor Strange, so he's sort of in the mix there. But there is, even though that guy has been through the same things, he still has suffered the same loss, because that's before their timelines sort of diverge. It's, there is still this guy that if he can look past his pain, you get him in that right state of mind, he is ultimately going to do the right thing no matter what. There was, there was a lot. I thought it was just a really well crafted episode, and that comes back around in a satisfying way, despite, unlike some of the later episodes, which do get sort of satisfying conclusions through the finale, but their own episode gets short shrift because they just end. That one is still a complete story, even if you don't see the finale.
Anyone want to riff on that episode?
Yes. My favorite. It's my number one. It's by far, like, and I know I gravitate towards grief, but it was excellently executed. It was a good story for people. Let me just say it this way. So I think that the Marvel Universe, DC, whatever, I think we find escapism in these types of platforms, right? Like we find joy and all of these other things, but it was an opportunity to have true sadness. And I don't think that we respect a lot of the pain and suffering that we go through when we experience loss. And 99.9% of characters and heroes lose someone. And I don't think we're so naturally gravitating towards the actual like heroism of like, oh, like the arc of them getting over it, as opposed to the suffering piece. And I think that it was an opportunity to really just get in the mud. And it was honest. And I think that a lot of people who are watching and fans like could sit in it and sit in the trouble and ask themselves, what would I do? And it's not what if, what would I do if I had the opportunity, if I could think about it differently, if I could change something. And I think that that's powerful and allowed us to all remember when we lost a friend, when we lost a family member, when we lost someone that we love, and we had this huge hurt. And, AA says like, the God-sized hole, like, what do you do to fill it?
Yeah.
And I think it was the first time it was like, it explored something authentic and real. And so I it's my number one episode.
And I
So,
really love what
what was-
Brittany was saying there about what would we do, because his motivations in that for all the pain that they end up causing are completely understandable. It's like,
Pure.
given that kind of power, I'd probably try to do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's so rare
Mhm.
as well for Marvel or DC or any other major company to have an episode or a movie or any sort of media that's in its truest form is a tragedy. And for them to take the risk, I would say that this was the biggest risk that What If took throughout the entire series. We're going to end on a sad note with no resolution.
Yep.
And granted, there was like Marty was saying, there was resolution in the overall arc, but to have a fade to black where the man is just lonely and regretting everything that he did, it was so powerful.
I totally agree.
I
And to
really
be-
appreciate.
if
Go ahead,
to
Scott.
just to say, if they hadn't done the redemptive arc, I probably would have rated it higher.
Hmm.
In other words, I loved the episode, and that whimper at the end is devastating. It's the opposite of It's a Wonderful Life, right? Nobody comes. All the things he does to change things actually work against him. And I, like you, Billy, I thought it was bold. And as I got further away from it, I liked it more, not in the sense of, ooh, I like this, but like artistically, just, yeah, this happens. This kind of stuff happens. And you don't have to bring joy and all the other stuff back into the universe through a character. You can do that through other characters. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you can let that person have that experience. So I was disappointed that he wasn't gone. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but as you said, I thought it was a bold way to end an episode. It's like, damn, okay, we're doing it. And of course, I tell you what, man, I just love animation, and the stuff they were doing with him in that final episode with, Cthulhu coming out of him and all that. I'm in 100%, but I would have rated it higher if they had just let it be. Because yeah. Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry. Daniel was going to say something, and then Travis.
Yeah, mine will be brief. I feel the same way, that I would have preferred if they hadn't kind of given him that redemptive arc. And because one of the things I do appreciate that episode is that, one of the kind of thematic points it makes is that sometimes there's not a happy ending. And it's just, and then that's just it. That's the end. And at the end of that episode, it really did feel like the end. And I appreciated that about the episode. In balance, I don't think Marvel would take a risk like that on a movie or a live action show for the time being. Maybe in the future, who knows? But I think What If was the kind of space where they could try something like that. And I was kind of going back and forth between making that one my number 3 and the Ultron Part 2. The Ultron Part 2 I chose ultimately because I thought it was fun. I was actually, I think in some ways, the 2 episodes that moved me most was the Doctor Strange one and the T'Challa Star-Lord one, but for different reasons. I was moved by hearing Chadwick Boseman's voice again. But that one was really powerful. And I just didn't want to do the tie thing just to overcomplicate my choices, but that would have been probably tied with number 3 for me as well.
So what would you have tied?
It would have tied for number 3. So 3rd place. Or actually, maybe no. Number 2, maybe, yeah. But then you said don't change your choices, so I'm just gonna stick with my top 3. But
okay. And what was your
debating?
All right. So what was your number 3 then? Just to make sure I got it coded right here.
Part 2 of Ultron.
Part 2 of, oh, that's why. Yeah, I've got it. Okay, I had the. Okay, it's here. I got it.
What if he had chosen a tie for number 3? I am the Watcher.
Would have made my math a mess. Travis, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I really like this episode, the Doctor Strange losing his heart versus Zans, because a lot of my veterans that I work with and active duty guys, they always have like that hindsight bias. What if I had gone left and not right? Then they sit there and play it in their head, and you get to see that play out for Doctor Strange. He learns all the arts and then does it, and then it continues to happen again and again. So you can't you can't always know what's going to happen if you made that
Mm.
left versus right, or you
Yeah.
know, she drove versus I drove.
Brittany, would you go ahead and give me your number 2 and 3?
Yeah. So my number 2 is episode 3. What if the world lost its mightiest heroes?
Yep.
And then and then my number, I'm so frustrated about it, but like my number 3 is the zombie episode, and I hate it so much. I hate it so much.
Well, you don't have to hate score, right? I mean, you can.
But the reason why it's my number 3 is because it's the one that I talked about the most. It was the one that caused conversation and being like, can you imagine how ridiculous this is? Like, how do they still have superpowers in their zombies? Like, it was the one episode that allowed me to kind of be mad at the
I got you.
and ask questions and think about it and kind of talk in the space. And so my number 3 has to be that, not because I like the story or anything else, is because it literally caused the most dialogue.
I
just say that's a really interesting, that's a super interesting way to make a top 3 choice. I think I just wanted to say that that's really, instead of like what I liked, but what caused the most conversation or thought. I just think that's really interesting.
And I was going over all the episodes. I was watching them last night, and I was talking to my husband about it, and I was just like, "Can you just believe that they just have these? Like, how does like Iron Man still get to shoot things? Like, I was like upset about it, and it's like there's something about this that forces us to like talk and like think about things critically, and I hated the premise and everything else. I was like, this is dumb. But
no,
it was interesting because there's nothing that, besides the Doctor Strange episode, there was nothing that I actually was just like, I want to talk about besides the zombie episode, which is bizarre. But
so you had the Room reaction, right? I mean, it's so bad it leads to fantastic discussion.
I mean,
go ahead.
When I've taught on bad movies, or really anytime I talk about using stories and teaching psychological concepts, I will often mention, and I'm sure I got this from someone else, but I can't remember who the original source was. But the only real bad art is the art that is unmemorable, right? I mean, if it provokes a reaction in you, good or bad, then it's doing something.
It's the Ed Wood effect. Absolutely.
There you go.
Oh.
Yeah.
I actually like what you said there, because the one thing about bad movies, bad shows, whatever, is it immediately allows us to create an out group where no one gets hurt. Right. In other words, we can come together and say, we don't like that, and here's why we didn't like that. And we're all in an in-group. Now, I mean, people do that stuff in real life all the time. We like ourselves because we don't like them. But one of the reasons there's a podcast I used to listen to all the time, and that's because they would riff on the characters as an out group. And there was just a lot of guilty pleasure in listening to them do that. And so I would write in and join the group, but I like that idea.
But I will say, just going to clarify, like why my number 1 was my number 1. Again, I gravitate towards grief. I think that it's amazing. It's interesting and something that is a phenomenon that people don't talk about enough. This is the one thing that unites us, regardless of race, gender, anything else. Like, we're all going to lose somebody. We're all going to lose something. And I appreciate this episode, or that episode, because it allowed for the opportunity to sit with your incongruence. We are a culture that likes to have the heroes win. We are a culture that is romanticized by good overcoming. And sometimes that's not true. Like, sometimes you get beat up by the bully, and sometimes you lose the things that you want most, and that's life. Like, this is true life. And I think that it gave us a service, like a true service to the experience of humanity. And so I really liked the episode because it was one of the first ones where I think that the hero's journey was truly rewritten. And so you have this classic arc of call to action, and you're going in, you go through a traumatic event, and you overcome, and it didn't serve that narrative. It kind of rewrote it. It gave an opportunity to kind of explore something different that's not a traditional hero's journey. And and like I said, and I did this episode before, for people who are novice and who do not know anything about Marvel or know anything about any type of like superhero, anything, if that was the first version of the story that we ever heard, it was believable, completely believable. And so I think that that was another reason why it was like extraordinary, because all of these other ones, it's like, yeah, it kind of fits, kind of doesn't, like whatever. But this was, because 99.5% of the superheroes lose someone, it makes sense. It completely makes sense. So I think that's another reason why it was just like, yeah, this is, for me, the obvious number one.
I know Billy and Eric wanted to say something.
Sorry.
Marty as well, but Marty kept getting interrupted.
Sorry.
No, let's go ahead. Let's go. Eric, Billy, Marty. All right.
I was just going to tie back to both what Brittani said about, being something that unites all of us, right? And I think Marty said it earlier, that the perspective of Doctor Strange, even though it's obvious to us watching it as the watchers, is that he's on this self-destructive path. It's completely understandable. And Brittany's right. I mean, like, we like our heroes to win. And not only did he lose, but he lost in the worst possible way, at least in that episode. He's isolated forever, as far as we know of. And as I watched it, I mean, I'm sure there are many of us who could sit there and probably go, oh, I wouldn't do this, or I would have, stopped earlier. But as I watched it, I'm like, no, even knowing what I know, I could still feel like I would have gone to that ultimate conclusion. I mean, there's, other sorts of stories like The Monkey's Paw or Pet Sematary, things like that, that I won't watch because it's too, my identification is so tight that I'm like, I would go that route, even knowing what was going to happen,
Leaving Las Vegas got an Oscar, man.
Yeah.
And that was a bizarre outcome for that movie to get an Oscar, but you're right. It's not what we usually do. How about you, Billy?
I had just had two quick points to riff off what Brittani was saying. The first one is, I would love if Dark Loops could capture that clip of Brittani going, "This is dumb," and just play it at specific points, because it was just, I laughed so hard and probably broke the audio, so I apologize for that.
No, I got it here.
And secondly, I will disagree with this rewriting the hero's narrative, the hero's journey. And the reason I'm disagreeing with that is I think it still fit that arc within all the episodes. But I think it took a pause at the most uncomfortable time in the hero's journey, which is when they're at their lowest.
Yeah, they weren't willing to end with the second act. I mean, the end of the second act is the worst time. Empire Strikes Back, and I wish they would have empired it. Just let it happen, right? But but you're right. That pause is what stuck, right? No, exactly. And then we're gonna go to Marty.
And I'm actually riffing on one of Brittany's earlier points about how infuriating the zombie episode is. And the thing that I think is most infuriating there is, as someone who was a fan of the Star-Lord episode, it completely undoes that characterization of T'Challa in a way, because in Star-Lord, we see T'Challa can just convince Thanos to abandon his genocidal path, apparently with very little problem. And yet in the zombie episode, he can't convince the kind android not to feed his leg to a zombie. So it's kind of like, is this really fair? Although I suppose it does go back to some of what we talked about with the Doctor Strange episode, that, we can make bad decisions when we're in love, and clearly Vision has a
Vision's
similar
love.
journey to Doctor Strange, maybe in
Right.
that episode. But still,
Well,
I'm like, come on, T'Challa.
Okay, let's run the simulation earlier to something that I think might have been Scott or several of us mentioned, is that having T'Challa sort of not be beholden to being an eventual king, right? T'Challa, Star-Lord T'Challa, has been out into the vistas of space and seen all those different worlds. So he has the sort of spiritual and moral compass from his upbringing in Wakanda, but he also has something else going on. Whereas in the zombie one, it's a little bit more traditional. So there you go.
There's like, and the zombie one's not on my top 3, but there's a couple things I did enjoy about it. One, the fact that you get to see Vision kind of go down the same path that Wanda went down for WandaVision, right? Like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes for her, like love eternal type of thing.
And come on, Scarlet Witch, Hulk. I mean, that's a fight I'll watch any day, man. I mean, all of these episodes in the end had some fairly redemptive animation, which is a portion while I'm there. Absolutely. So have we all commented on?
I do want to piggyback off of what Travis just said. It was curious too, like in that episode, Wanda still loses Vision. She still sees him in that way, like still sees him destroyed. So it was something that I took away of just being like, wow, regardless of what world it is, what universe it is, she still sees a damaged, broken person or broken thing, like a shell of a person. And it was kind of like poetic how they did that, where it was, she loses him in this like heroic way, and in the Avengers movies, and then she also loses him in this other way in the show.
Well, in the What If comics, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, man.
Oh, the What If comics, some of them will go in completely different directions, and others will play with this sort of balance of you zig instead of zag, but we all still end up at the more or less the same point, or the sort of what is the ancient one points out in the Doctor Strange episode, right? It's like this, it's like a nexus point or whatever for race chooses. This has to happen, right? And one of my favorite classic what ifs has all these different people, Flash Thompson, Gwen Stacy, and other characters getting bitten by the radioactive spider instead of Peter, right? But every story ends with Uncle Ben dying at some point, and then Peter somehow getting bitten or taking up some other power, right? There are certain arcs that may bend, but come back to at least the essence of the characterization. So that's a constant tension that I think is fun.
What if Uncle Ben lived?
Yeah.
I wonder if they've done that. Let's find out.
What I'm going to do
They
now.
have actually, because I think he appears in, at least there's one where it's Uncle Ben who's bitten, and he appears in one of the Spider-Verse crossovers, I think.
Exactly. I was gonna say Spider-Verse is kind of like What If, in that it brings in all the other universes in the multiverse. And there's one that, I distinctly remember. In fact, there's one that he is the spider in his universe. Uncle Ben is the spider of that universe, Spider-Man, whatever.
Spider-Ben.
Spider-Ben.
Travis, can you give me your top 3?
Yeah, number 1 for me was episode 3, The World Lost Its Mightiest Heroes.
Okay.
Number 2 was episode 9, The Watcher Broke His Oath. And number
Okay, hold
3
on, let me keep up.
Yep.
Number 9, or wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. Number 9. Okay. And then your third?
Episode 4, Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands.
Okay. All righty then. So go ahead and riff on why you chose episode 3 as your number 1.
Yeah, so I am also wearing a Marvel shirt, right? God of Mischief with Loki and the TVA. But I really like how Loki helps at the end. But what I really loved about that episode is you get to see Nick Fury's aspect of throughout everything and how he's experiencing, because he's in so many things. He's in all the movies, he has little cameos, but to be able to see him interact this much and just how no matter what he does, he keeps getting shit on, kind of. I kind of enjoyed that. And the shift was that Hope joins Shield, and then died, and then you get to see Hank Pym go kind of after losing his wife already and then his daughter. That kind of pushed him to the end, but not even getting to see the shift like we did with the other episodes, but seeing it play out because of that shift.
Anyone want to comment?
And that episode wasn't real high on my list. In fact, it's probably towards the bottom, but I absolutely agree on that point where they don't really ask the real what if question in the title. And that's what the whole episode is, a mystery. And part of that mystery then is, what is that real shift? You're right. It's really all about hope well before the events of the episode. And that did, I think, make it sort of interesting because none of the others really played with the concept in that exact way and sort of made you guess at what the shift was. So I did appreciate, even though again, it wasn't a favorite of mine, I did appreciate that.
I think when we go ahead, Brittany, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
No, I thought it was an interesting episode, and another reason why I ranked it 2 for me, it's this idea of, again, like we celebrate these stories, we celebrate her, like the heroic nature of them, and it's, again, I mean, like, not to sound like cliche, but the what if these people weren't there? What if we had to like actually like look up to our lawmakers or look up to police or something else? Like, if no one was saving us, then what?
Right.
And so I think that's the piece for me that was interesting, because we get lost in these stories of like someone else coming to rescue. And this was the first time where it was like, no, the most powerful people in the world, allegedly, like, they can't help you. And so how can you save yourself? What happens next? And I think that it was the perfect time to have a conversation about what would life look like the day after? What would life look like 10 days after, 20 days after, 10 years after, if there weren't these people who are in our story? And so I think that it left the biggest amount of room to grow. And so I think that was a really good shift or cool narrative to have.
Anyone want to respond to that? Well, that means you dropped the mic, and you're absolutely correct. And exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Billy, and I'm going to ask you to tell me your top 3.
All right, here are my top 3. These are the correct top 3. Everyone else, I respect your opinions. Thank you for playing the game. However, here are the right answers.
We're ready.
I really hope these are popular answers.
Oh, we're going to jump. Believe me, don't worry about
it. Yeah, I'm going to get jumped on. So for number 3, it's a tie between the Killmonger episode and one that hasn't really been mentioned yet, the Thor episode.
Yep. If Thor were an only child.
Okay. Brittany's putting a thumbs down. It's okay. You're entitled to your opinion.
Okay, just a second, Billy. So the Killmonger, what if Killmonger rescued Tony Stark?
Yes.
Okay, got you. All right. And that's your bottom of the 3. Okay, got you.
Number 2, and I know we haven't talked about this one much, the zombies one. And
yeah,
I find hilarious because Brittany had brought up when she was talking about it, how it was the one that was the most discussed. And then in the discussion about how it was the most discussed, we discussed it the most out of the other episodes. And that's meta for you.
No.
And number 1, no surprises here, the Doctor Strange episode.
Yay!
Oh, high five. High five.
Wow. Strange is turning it up. So
really
do you want to tell us why Strange was your favorite, or would you rather talk about one of the other ones, since we've talked about Strange so much? It's up to you.
Well, I'll touch on Strange, but I would like to talk about Thor with, like you had mentioned, Scott, the themes of the occult.
Yeah.
I loved how dark and it went darker than most of the MCU tends to go.
Yeah.
And I have this weird, I'm drawn to having established characters reach their breaking point. I like to see what makes them human. And you could argue that what makes us human is that line of our breaking point and the choices we make when we come close to it, which is the essence of What If.
Mhm.
But I would like to bring up the Thor episode because we really haven't touched much on it. And I love how it's a display of adolescence
Hmm.
in Thor. And I love how tall and ripped and iced frost giant Loki is. It's one of the few times I haven't been super impressed with how Captain Marvel has been built by the MCU, but this is one of the first times I found myself actively cheering for her.
Mm.
And I love that at the end of the day, you know, this god of thunder, one of the strongest beings in the multiverse, is stopped dead in his tracks by his mom. And
Yep.
the mom glare of, the hell are you doing? I'm coming down there right now. So I had, you know, traumatic flashbacks to my own Filipino childhood from that.
You know what's funny is that the Thor and the Killmonger episodes are the two lowest ranked ones on IMDb.
Well, IMDb is wrong. You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
I agree that Killmonger, that's the bottom for me. And it's partly because,
Ooh.
you know, even though I mentioned, you know, like Captain Carter works really well as a self-contained episode, Doctor Strange, even though there's a continuation of it later, is still a self-contained story. That wasn't an ending in the Killmonger episode. If you cannot enjoy that one on its own, basically, because all of a sudden, like, and we ran out of time, I guess. I've just, you know, it's structurally, it is by far the worst episode. There can be some other things about it, but I just, yeah, it just didn't work as an episode because you need that finale in order to get the full story.
So I'll agree with you on that point. However, the characterization of Killmonger, I loved, because you never knew what he was going to do next. He was very much a Bruce Wayne 3 steps ahead character.
What you knew he was going to do was be ahead of everybody.
Yes.
And, you know, honestly, I would have ranked, it is on my ranking, and I would have ranked it much higher if they hadn't started the episode with the Watcher saying, and a villain gets a chance. I mean,
Yeah.
to collapse Killmonger to the status of a villain is it's an insult to the people who wrote Killmonger in the movie. I'm sorry, but they busted their ass to create an incredibly nuanced person you loved and hated, and you never got to collapse into one or the other. And for the Watcher to come out and categorize him as a villain was like, wait, you got to check with the other writers, man. You don't get to do that, because I thought it was, of the episodes, I thought it was crazy bold. And I thought, yeah, okay, so Tony's, you know, Tony thinks he's bad, but he's never been in the military. He's never been down and out. You know, he's never been through the world as Killmonger had. So I thought that episode was like Killmonger's the world coming back to give you your comeuppance. And but I didn't like, and we've talked about this a lot, I didn't like moving him into a villain space so easily. I thought it was a better character than that. So
and we think about like how that affects like socially, like how it affects all of us, like to narrate him in that way. But kind of to go to Billy's point, I'm talking about that episode. For the Thor episode, I dislike it because I feel as though, again, if we're talking about social narratives of boys will be boys, you can cause a ruckus, you can be silly and do the things that you want because that's your prerogative. And even in that episode, we have a phone call within 2 days of knowing Thor that it's like, oh, I love you. Where she's this like mesmerized woman who's just like, oh my God, like this, like, I just like, I disliked that. Like, it was just like, this is like socially like not really appropriate for the times and silly. Like, no one falls in love in 2 days.
Day one, they got matching tattoos.
I
mean,
and it's Vegas, Brittany. It's Vegas.
that's
Sorry,
That's the
my
thing, I think
bar
it's a
is very,
satire.
very high. Apparently. I just didn't like it in that sense of just being like this idea of like mommy boy, kind of like whatever. It just seemed like kind of like a frat house party that went wrong and cool.
And
Well,
that's
the other
why I
thing
loved
There's
it.
is-
I
no
think it was
depth to the conversation.
well, that's why I loved it. I think it was a satire of that trope. Because I know
But yeah, it's a satire, but I did feel like it still in the end reinforces the sense that you could be the irresponsible frat boy and someone will bail you out
And get
because
away with it.
you're privileged, you're white, you're a man, you're cis, you're able-bodied. I mean, all those things, someone's gonna bail you out. And so yeah, so there was like a big chunk of it where I was able to just be like, okay, I think this is annoying for me, but I get that it's comedy, satire, so whatever. But then at the end, I was like, no, I mean, like they could have kind of shown where irresponsibility gets not only you and your family, but the entire world in this case, the entire human world. But instead, he's bailed out. So it's just like, okay.
But in the story, everybody else almost like in all the other narratives, there is some growth. Where does he grow? Where? The only thing that he grows is that he learns better to lie to his mom. Like there is no character development. He's still the same person doing the same, sorry for my language, shit. And he just gets to lie to his mom. Yay! Like I don't get it.
And I think, and this is not a defense, because if it was a defense, it would mean that you are attacking the correct opinion. So I know you're not attacking the correct opinion. So here's my opinion, which is in conjunction and conflux and other big words to impress the audience towards your incorrect opinion. Here's why. It was in the large arc of things. Right after the Doctor Strange episode, it was a perfect palate cleanser. It was the sorbet that hit your taste buds after the rich steak of Doctor Strange.
That's what trash tastes like.
What's that?
You know, I gotta say that the writers might be more clever than we're giving them credit for. I mean, you do that episode and you're going to have a group of the population who just riffs to it, it resonates to it, and then you're going to have another portion of the population that's like, what the hell? Oh,
we call those grown-ups.
It must be sarcasm, right? And the thing is, if those two groups aren't talking to each other, right, you just ride the wave as a writer. Yeah. No, in our podcast, we definitely had Brittany's reaction, right? But we see that, you know, there's like, Travis, do you know if that was one of the highest ranked episodes?
The Thor one?
Yeah.
The very lowest.
Oh, it was actually the lowest. Oh.
6.5.
Where it belongs.
But
The highest one was Ultron and then Doctor Strange.
Hmm.
I liked
I
it
have to
before it was
agree with-
cool.
I have to agree with what Billy said, that structurally it works well. It's very light, and that was, you needed that change post Doctor Strange. That did help. I mean, the thing is, it's so light that the thing that struck me during the discussion we've had of the episode is, as you're all talking, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't remember how the Thor episode ended. It made no impact on me. It was just, I just kind of, but you know, it was that sort of, oh, this is, you know, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better. This is easy after the Doctor Strange. And I think that worked well sort of structurally for the season.
Mjolnir was bedazzled and tagged on. That's how it ended.
Well,
But-
and they're
Right,
They're
like
putting-
every episode starts to get darker and darker and darker, and then you get this weird Thor one and then dark again. Like each
Isn't
one
that-
progressively gets deeper.
But
It
isn't
was
it
like an act break.
it's like the human experience of okay, well, it's too, and we talk about we think about it in therapy, it's too tough to go down, so now I need some like brevity. I need something to pull me back up. I need something that's light and that I don't have to work hard on, or I don't have to think about too hard. Like exactly to your point, Marty, is like I don't know how it ended. I know pieces of it, but it's like it got there.
It did its job, but yeah, no, it's not, you know, but yeah, no, did I really care much about the episode? No.
Oh, and it could be interesting to see how I would like to hear the writers' conversations, right? Because they were doing these all at once, right? It wasn't like they were watching the real-time audience tweets, etc. I mean, like, okay, now we got to change it up for the next ones. They just put that out there, and of everything they've done, this is once again the most experimental, right? I didn't know until the second to last episode, and certainly until the very last episode, that they were going to tie all these threads together. Up until then, it was all just one-offs in completely different universes, right? So they can't all be hits, right? But I think that this was the perfect space for them to play a little. And some people are going to prefer the sorbet. Some people are going to prefer the steak, and
Yes.
yeah, it would be interesting to hear their conversations.
Yes, and to convince them and you all about why you're incorrect about this particular episode.
I appreciate that, Billy, and we're going to move on to my rankings, and then we will have ranked them all. So I have a tie for the bottom between Doctor Strange and Killmonger. And again, the reason it's not the reason that Strange isn't up at the top for me is because they brought him back with this redemptive arc, which I thought was, come on, just anyway, didn't like that. So I couldn't give it a higher ranking. And Killmonger would have been higher in my ranking, maybe even close to number one if they had been able to keep the character complexity equal to what they had done in Black Panther. But reducing the complexity of that character was, dare I say, kind of a cultural insult, particularly where we are now. You can't write Killmonger simply now. So, because man, you watch the events that take place in the episode, they are badass. I mean, boom, 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 boom. And there's no reason that has to be something a villain. There's no reason we have to talk about it that way. So anyway, the tie for there. Number two, Captain Carter. And much for the same reasons we've all said, it was a complete episode, and it was a love story. And it was the one that, for me, all she did, the woman stays in the room. You get a little Hamilton going on in your head, want to be in the room where it happens. She is, and then she makes it happen, right? And they worked hard. They worked hard to show that she still loved and respected Steve, even though they were, he was still a rather small guy and had all this self-doubt and such. So they worked hard to do that, and I enjoyed it in that sort of complete sense. My favorite episode is T'Challa Star-Lord, and I think it's, for me, the one where they let the characters be coherent. And for me, to see Thanos, I don't remember who he was sitting with at the bar, but he was saying he's trying to explain his half theory. Wasn't it? I thought it was a robot. It wasn't Vision, but it was like,
I think it happened several times.
Yes,
I think he does that a few times in the
He
episode.
did it with the whole table of the Ravengers. They were going back and forth about it too. But Drax, was it Drax at the bar?
There may have been, but what they didn't do is provide any counter arguments. Nobody checked his math. Nobody. I would have loved to see that happen a little more. But I really, just for the same reasons you've mentioned, to hear Chadwick Boseman get to express that character in a different way was extremely satisfying and worked for me. So during our conversation, I've added up the scores, and I will tell you the top three episodes. And Billy, you can tell us whether or not we're right or you're right. So at the in number 3, we have Captain Carter. Number 2, we have T'Challa being the Star-Lord. And the number 1 episode is Doctor Strange. I have to admit I'm surprised, but that's precisely how it worked out. Anyone have any final comments or issues they want to raise about the
What's the
series?
honorable mention? What was number 4? I'm just curious, and how close was that?
Yeah. Oh, it was a severe drop off. But we would have to go with the world lost its mightiest heroes, right? Because both you and Brittany voted for that one in pretty high rankings. So the rest of them were kind of scrambling.
Scott, you mentioned that you were surprised. What did you think the rankings would be based on you knowing all of us?
Oh, interesting. I really thought Killmonger's episode would have ranked higher. And T'Challa Star-Lord doesn't surprise me. Carter doesn't surprise me. When we podcasted Strange, we liked it, but we didn't have the same level of reverence. I mean, Brittany did, but I don't remember the crew having the same level of reverence at the time that we seem to be sort of expressing now. It's like, for me, it's like a good single malt scotch, right? You a little burn, but then time goes by and a little aftertaste, and then damn, that's good. And it's good because it's deep. It's good because it's rich, and because it hurts a little. Right. And me, I always got to have some vinegar with my fish and chips, right? It can't just be tartar sauce. So that's the only one that surprised me.
I think that I do think that it's a piece of, it's nice to get lost in these stories, but it's also nice to get lost in ourselves. I think that that's why profound. Like that's why I think that the Doctor Strange episode resonated with a lot of people, even if it was the day of or weeks later. There's something about this that hits home. And
totally.
And this is one of those very, very, very unique things that we will all go through, all of us. Not everyone's gonna have sex, not everyone's gonna get married, not everyone's gonna have a kid, but loss, everyone's gonna go through. And so,
and we will all remember how that episode ended.
Yeah.
We all, because it was truly an anime. The next close animation feat would be the end of Akira, when Tetsuo becomes a sort of singularity. That stunning animation. But
well, it's not just that. It's not even that. It's how we mess up our own lives.
No.
Too. Like we are in so much control, and yet we F it up.
That was beautifully optimistic. Yes.
Marty, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just thinking about the rankings, one thing that I was kind of noticing, and maybe my memory's a little bit off, but it seems like we all have that level of appreciation for the Doctor Strange episode, because even if we didn't rank it number one, I think it was on almost everyone's list. Whereas T'Challa, it was kind of either number one, or then about half the group didn't rank it in the top three at all. So there is that strain that seemed like that had more of a dichotomous kind of rating, whereas everyone saw something in the Doctor Strange. And again, I love your Scotch metaphor, mainly because as soon as this is done, I'm going to enjoy a nice single malt. But I think there's something to that. That yes, there is that complexity that we all found something for. But as much as I loved T'Challa, it didn't necessarily have that as universal a reaction, it seems.
Well, I think it goes back to what Eric had said earlier. Art sticks with you. And I think there are many ways that episode was art, and many ways that it stuck with us.
Oh, dude, I love monsters, right? And the way they animated all those monsters being embedded in his person was just stunning. I haven't seen animators work that hard, since Spider-Verse, and of course most anime. But that was, I'm in. I loved it.
Yeah, but that's like that. Even beyond that, it's like we are the monsters.
Well, yeah, exactly. And they're all he becomes absolutely.
Like he internalized them, but it's like we are the monsters. Like we're the ones who are driving it.
Absolutely.
They're on Mulberry Street.
of all the episodes, and it's funny that Brittany said like the zombie one. At Disney right now, they're doing the Oogie Boogie Bash, which is like a villain trick-or-treating, which is great. I went last week and it was phenomenal. But they're adding zombie Captain America this week for the last week of Halloween. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Just that they took somebody from this show already and throwing it as a cast member, to walk around and watch people take candy.
No, very cool.
Amazing.
One thing that did, and I don't know if you guys touched on this on the zombie episode of the podcast, the Scott Lang, the zombie episode might have been number one, but Scott's humor in that episode completely threw me out as the disembodied Futurama-esque head.
Mm. So you didn't like that?
Oh, I could not stand it because it made the mistake that and I talk about this a lot, and I'm sure everybody will get this rant from me at some point in our lives. Big Bang Theory had an episode where they dealt with a professor's death, and it had the potential to be a beautiful, I would almost say Emmy-winning episode.
Mm.
The writers could not help falling back on ill-timed, inappropriate to the mood jokes. And I felt like Scott's jokes were inappropriate to the mood. They were incongruent with the feeling of dread and apprehension that fulfilled the rest of the episode.
But they could also have this is neither necessarily right nor wrong. They play a balancing act, right? And if we're talking about having episodes that are supposed to play to as many people as possible, right? Not everybody wants to dive in and sit in that, right? It's just why, like, a lot of horror films have even just small moments of humor, right? To be a little bit of a palate cleanser or attention cutter. So that's my point. And if you disagree with me, Billy, I think we should just publicly now say that we're going to have a cage match to settle our grudge.
It's Wesselmann versus San Juan.
That'll be the bonus material on the DVD.
Cage down, steel chairs.
What up? So that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. What If crew members, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, you can find me at popmythology.com, also on Facebook and Twitter at popmythology.
Fantastic. How about you, Eric?
You can find me on the Department of Psychology's webpage at Illinois State University. You can find me on the Twitter at Eric Wesselmann, and you can find my film musings if you Google normal theater film culture.
Excellent. How about you, Brittani?
Hi, I'm on Instagram. It's Be Therapeutic like Bumble.
Fantastic. And you, Billy?
If you're looking for Mr. Magic, the king of kayfabe, the scion of psychology, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Billy_sense. That's BILLI_SENSE. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, Metamucil keeps you regular and will make sure that you don't show up late to podcasts. So recommended by the scion of psychology. 100% psyllium husk, ladies and gentlemen.
Don't take too much, or else you will be late for the podcast.
It's a balancing act.
Excellent. How about you, Marty?
Not real active on social media, but you can find me occasionally tweeting on Twitter at Marty_Lloyd. And if you've ever seen me on one of these panels before through Wizard World or something like that, you'll note that I said the other way to get my attention. You could always come to Minnesota and commit a crime. I may evaluate you.
That is one hell of an invitation. I gotta tell you what. How about you,
I have
Travis?
yet to get a cease and desist from the Minnesota Board of Tourism. So until then.
There you go. How about you, Travis?
You can find me on Twitter at @themarine_peer, PEER.
Excellent. I'm on Twitter at @dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the What If crew at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback on this podcast, please do so on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, we are the Watchers.
We are the Watchers.
All right, y'all, let's do that again. Come on, man.
Metamucil takers.
I had it.
Here we go. All right, so there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, we are the Watchers. All right, take care. Bye-bye.